Okay. Okay, here we go. Alrighty. Are we ready to get started? Okay, and you're able to see my screen share? Okay. Alright, just let me know when it starts. We're live? Oh, okay. We are live. Welcome, everybody, to the second part of the full stack web development workshop. This is the kind of like the front end React part of the workshop. Last week was databases. Next week's going to be, well, not next week, but the week after spring break, right before Rowdy Hacks, is going to be the back end and kind of conclusion of everything. But before we dive into kind of the actual workshop itself, I'm just going to go over some brief ACM stuff really quick. So this is not the sign-in QR code. Don't scan this. It's a lie. Just head over to portal.acmutsa.org/events, and you'll be able to see this event there. Go ahead and check in. Membership is completely free. There's no reason not to be an ACM member. So if you, for some reason, aren't yet, definitely go ahead and sign up. You get a bunch of benefits if you attend 9 of our meetings over the course of the semester. You're going to get free t-shirt, a bunch of swag and giveaways. I know right now for anyone who we're giving away an Switch just for registering. And then also you obviously get an invite to our spring celebration and networking event. That's going to be in April. Definitely recommend going to that. We're going to provide free food, and it's kind of just celebration of ACM at the end of the year. Some upcoming events we have are not these because this is previous, so we're just going to skip right over that. Everyone should attend ICPC. ICPC is awesome. If you're looking for good coding practice interview, definitely recommend attending that. That is on Sundays from 1 to 4. And you can actually join their Discord at go.acmutsa.org/ICPC. And lastly, if you aren't registered for Rowdy Hacks somehow yet, definitely register. It's going to be a great event. We're really looking forward to it. That's going to be the weekend after spring break, March 25th and March 26th. Registration is free. It's going to be like a 36-hour event. You're going to get to build a project. It's going to be great. Definitely go ahead and get signed up for that. And make sure you go through the whole registration process. There's like a form you have to fill in with some personal data right before, but once you get there, there'll be like a profile page, so you'll kind of know what that looks like. And if you like the way that site looks, it's built with React and Tailwind, which is what we're going to be talking about today. And that is still not the sign-in QR code. As I said, you'll just want to go to the portal website and just sign in there. Let's get this pulled up. So okay. So today we're going over React. So a little bit of a introduction for those who did not attend last week's workshop. So welcome, as I said, to the kind of full stack web development workshop series. This workshop is going to be broken down into 3 sections. We did the setup and databases last week. That video is going to be on YouTube, and you'll be able to watch it there if you do want to catch up. I would recommend, if you're watching this, in the future, like the recording, definitely go back and watch that to get caught up to the point where we're at now. We're going to be continuing to build off of that project. This is the front end and React part of the workshop. This is going to be probably the most complex part of the kind of series. And that's part of the reason that we are doing it right before spring break, is so that you'll have spring break to kind of build out your portfolio and everything before, we move to the back end and kind of wrap up section of the workshop. I just mentioned it was a portfolio, but for those who, as I said, weren't here last week, we're going to be building a portfolio. It's a really good starter project. It's going to have like a blog, so it's going to dynamically pull that content down from the server. We have a example of that project somewhere. I can get that pulled up here. Second. Okay. Here we go. So this is kind of an example. This is like a very generic website on purpose. We really want you to kind of build your own website and kind of like, design it something that's unique to you. So this is like a very generic website. But as you can see, we have these blog posts down here. You're able to like go and visit the actual page. And all those are dynamically loaded from the server. So it isn't like included in the HTML or anything like that. Those are all pulled down from the server. And all this is kind of the same tech stack that we've been using at ACM to develop stuff like the Rowdy Hacks website, Portal, Rowdy Creators website, so on and so forth. You are welcome to build whatever project you want, though. It's just I would definitely recommend, if you're starting off for sure, to go ahead and do the portfolio website. And it's a nice thing to have, add on to your resume, LinkedIn, whatever. Have a personal site. It's a great, item to add to your project portfolio. Okay. So just a brief rundown on what is React. For those that don't know, React is a web component framework. It's essentially makes doing websites better. And we're going to go into much more detail about what I mean by that today. There's a lot of different ways to solve the issues that React does. Personally, I think React is the best way to do it right now. And it has a really large ecosystem. There's a lot of jobs in React, which is also very nice. So it's a great skill to have going out of college, and would definitely recommend it if you're interested in the software engineering or web dev side of things. And we're also going to be using Next.js. And once again, I'm going to go into more details about what that is. But Next.js is basically more or less the way to do React for any project that's larger than just like a one-page website. Once again, I'm going to go into more detail about what Next does, but you can kind of think of it as a wrapper around React. Think of it like, I don't know what that diagram is called, but Next.js is a subset of React. I think that's the way it goes. But any knowledge you learn in Next it's just React. So, you'll be able to bring that knowledge to people who aren't using, Next.js and other kind of platforms, as long as it's React. Alrighty. Two final things. One, we are going to be using Next.js here. You're going to see other people as you continue to build up projects and stuff. The solution made by React is called Create React App. It's very easy to fall into that kind of hole. I'd recommend avoiding Create React App like the plague. It's not well maintained. There's other kind of better options. If you don't need the full kind of thing that Next.js does, there's other options like Vite and some others that you can look into after this workshop. If you are building projects in the future, though, I would recommend avoiding Create React App and give Next.js a shot. It's really good, and we're going to talk a little bit about why today and also in the next workshop. But let's go ahead and get started. And before I do, as I was saying earlier, React is pretty complicated and can be a very different way of thinking than you might have done in previous classes you're in, especially if they followed the MVC model, the model view controller kind of model. React does things very differently. So, remember, there are no stupid questions. If you do have a question, just ask. I'm more than happy to answer it. React can definitely be very daunting at first. And also, I'm kind of expecting a little bit that you have some previous HTML and CSS knowledge going into this. I'm going to briefly explain some of it, but generally we're expecting this to be, for the sake of brevity, it's going to focus very much on React. So let's dive right in. So I was talking earlier, React is a web component framework. And the keyword there is components. So let's talk a little bit about components. So if you, let's see, we'll go here to this page. I'm going to kind of code this out in real time because I think that's a little bit easier of a way to follow along. Let me see. Can I? Yeah, there. So that's a little bit bigger. Hopefully that makes the text a little bit more readable. All right. So right now we have this web page. This is kind of the point that we got to last week, where you're able to run yarn run dev here. And this page will just come up as localhost 3000 in your web browser. You can, if it doesn't auto open that URL, you can just visit it and you'll have this kind of blank page here. Now, if we go over here, if you have experience with HTML, some of this will look very similar. So you have stuff like divs, H1 elements, all these kind of things. And you would know that all of these kind of have different behaviors. So H1s are for titles, divs are kind of for putting boxes around content. Stuff like main and sections and whatnot are kind of for stating what different areas of the page are for. And we have a bunch of other ones. H3 is for, heading 3, other things. But there's also some other weird ones here like head and link, which you probably haven't seen before. We're going to talk a little bit about later on in the workshop. So essentially, components allow you to make your own HTML elements. Now, what do I mean by that? Essentially, you'll have a lot of times where you have repeated HTML elements and stuff like ones built into HTML have like certain behaviors assigned to them. They behave in certain ways, like we were just talking about. And React kind of builds on that idea and lets you make your own HTML elements. This also makes it so that it's really easy to kind of group your code together. If you have something like, let's say, a posts feed, for example, kind of like we do in our demo here, where we have these posts, and these all are kind of similar. You can kind of see that they're all they have a title, a description, this kind of stuff. This is the same HTML element pretty much repeated over and over. So it also allows us to make our code reusable because we essentially just have like a blog item that we're going to put here. And then that just makes up each one, and we can stack those. It's like a custom HTML element. Generally, a thing to note is that each component is going to go in its own file. You can put multiple in one, but it kind of helps you, stay on top of things if they're all in their own files. I'm going to kind of show you what I mean by that here in a moment. We kind of have an example here. As you can see, I have a components folder here, and it has some stuff for a landing page and like a nav and some other things there. And that kind of just makes your code very modular and easy to reuse. But there are also the last thing to notice. There are two different types of components, specifically when using Next.js. There's just components, and then there are pages. They're incredibly similar, and I'm going to show you the difference between them in a moment. But now let's dive a little bit more into each of the individual parts of a component. So for example, let's open up our nav bar here. So this can definitely seem a little bit daunting at first, but I'm going to go over some different parts of it actually, let's use a post item. This is a better example. So this is a little less daunting, a little bit smaller of a component. And each of those components are actually one of these recent post items. So the first thing I want to talk about is props. So kind of like how with a, HTML div, for example, where, here we have a class name and we're able to define some classes on it. We have style. We might have some other things like an on click here. With React components, because you're making your own HTML elements, you're actually able to define these individual props. They're called props. You can think of them like attributes. But as you can see here, for one of these post items, we have a title, a description, a image, and a slug. And those values get passed in, and then we can use them inside of our component. This allows us to kind of modify the behavior of a component. And it's important to know because, sometimes we have HTML elements that are similar, but not complete copies. So you can kind of see that here. So let's go ahead and actually make a component right now. So this is the part where I would recommend starting to follow along. This is going to be not necessarily what you're going to be building, but more so a demo of these concepts. So the first thing I'm going to do in my source directory, I'm going to go ahead and make a components folder. You don't have to do that. It just makes it a little bit easier to know where your components are by having a dedicated folder for them. For now, let's go ahead and make one that is called greeting. And the file extension for React components is, when you're using TypeScript, is tsx. So we're going to create that file. There we go. So there's some stuff with TypeScript that you have to do when using React that in the long term is going to be really helpful. And we're going to kind of go over some of that right now about how you would kind of scaffold out a component. So we're going to first do this import statement, which basically we're importing from another library. And in this case, we're going to be importing, we're going to be importing function component from React. And make sure React is lowercase. You can use uppercase, but you have to use the same across your entire application. And generally, they use lowercase. I don't know why it lets you do uppercase, but it does. And then the next thing we're going to do is this is going to look a little funky, but I'm going to explain it here in just a second. But we have this const greeting, and then we have this little colon thing, and then function component. Essentially, this is TypeScript's way of saying what the type of this variable is. So essentially, this is a function component. So it assigns certain properties to it that basically make React know, hey, this is a component. And also, you can see there's a little red squiggly there. That's because right now we're returning void because we're not returning anything. And it expects us to return a component or some HTML. So it's kind of nice having TypeScript to let us know when there's issues like that. And then the last thing we're going to add here at the bottom is export default. Whoops. Greeting. I did not spell that correctly. There we go. And that basically just says, like, if you've used Java before, it's kind of like the main export. They're like the main function, sort of. So that means that when we import this, if we don't say specifically what we're importing, which we won't for the most part, I'll kind of explain what that looks like later. But essentially, this is the thing that it should be looking for. It's kind of the default. And then we need a return statement here. So React components are just functions. So if you have any experience with JavaScript or TypeScript or really any functional language like C, for example, components are just functions. It can look a little bit scary, but essentially you're just returning HTML. So the first thing we're going to do here is we're going to add a div, and then we're just going to add a hello world. We'll add a little exclamation point there. And then you can save it with Command S or Control S on Windows. So now we have our first component. And this is that first type of component I was talking about, a normal, or not a normal component, but just a component. There's no special attachment to it. I'm going to go a little bit more into this folder structure later on, but the first thing you need to know is that the pages is where those page components that I was talking about go. Now, that does actually matter what they are named. Just like, or where they are located. So like before I was like, oh, you can, we're just putting them in the components folder because it's easier to know where they go. This time we're very explicitly saying, no, these have to go in the pages folder. So the first one we're going to make is we're going to make another file inside that pages directory, and we're just going to name it example.tsx. And this one's going to be just a touch different, but incredibly similar. We are going to add another import statement at the top, but this time we're importing the type next page. And we're importing that from next. And then you can just go down. And, we have example that's just GitHub Copilot auto-completing for me, but you can just type that. Very similar to the next one as you could, from the last one, as you can see, except instead of function component, this is a next page. That basically just says, hey, this is like the highest parent component. There's no real special properties beyond that you're going to learn about in this workshop. In the next one it's going to become a little bit more important, but also like last time, we're just going to add a export default example. And there we go. And we still have a red squiggly because we're not returning anything yet. So we're about to fix that. So we're going to add another div here. Whoops. And let's just add another h1 element and just say howdy. Okay, so now this is going to be the first time that you'll actually see some working code right in your environment. You're going to go over to that localhost page. We still have this index page. We're going to talk a little bit about that later, but you can actually just go to /example. And there we go. It says howdy. So there we go. We now have some working code. End of workshop. Have a good one, everyone. No. We have way more to do than that. So we made this greeting component, and now we want to show it in here. So this is where we are going to start talking a little bit about those props that I was talking about. So we're going to go back to our greeting component. Actually, we'll do this first. First, we're going to go up here, and we're going to do import, and we're going to just do greeting. And it might autocomplete for you, but this is going to be the what it should look like. So that means we're importing this component into this page. And you can import components into components. You can't import pages into components. Components can be imported to other components, but the page always has to be at the top level of that kind of tree. We're kind of how I talked about earlier, how we just made an HTML element. Now, this might look a little bit weird here, this like closing tag thing. This is exactly the same as this. And this is perfectly valid. You could totally do it this way. It's just that if you don't have anything inside of that components, like if we aren't putting, an H1 element or anything inside of there, it's a little bit easier just to do it this way, where we just have that slash and close. Alrighty. And now if we go back over to our page, it says hello world. It's right there. And we could even do something like go over here and maybe just to differentiate them, we could add something like text green 500. There we go. Hello world. Um, so we're now importing a component. So you can kind of see what I mean about those custom HTML elements here. And, we could add a bunch of other stuff. So maybe we want to add an H2, and then we could say welcome, for example. Now that welcome is showing there as well, gets imported in here. Does that make sense to everyone? Like the making custom HTML elements, kind of, that's the best like kind of analogy. So let's go back to that props thing I was talking about. Essentially, we're going to want to assign custom elements or custom attributes to these components. So let's say instead of welcome, we want to have, let's say we want to change the hello world to some different text. So the first thing we're going to do is, once again, because this is TypeScript and everything has to have a type, we're going to create a interface here. We can name it whatever we want, but I'm going to name it greeting props. And now we have a name assigned to those greeting props. And we're going to go over here, and we're going to do what's called extending a type. So we have the greeting props, and we just do that. This basically says that the attributes that we're passing into that greeting are going to be in this shape. So it's going to have a name that's named string. And then this is another kind of funky looking TypeScript thing. But don't worry, it's not like super complex. We have a curly braces there and a thing named name. That's called destructuring. Essentially, when we pass those values in as props, they are going to come in like this, where they are basically in a line. So maybe we had some other ones, like as we had earlier, description and some other things, and we would also add them to this interface. We have like description. We aren't doing that. So we're instead just going to do name and save that again. And now we have an error here. So what we're going to do is we just add a name. So what maybe do we want our welcome to be? Let's change it to howdy, howdy. Let's get rowdy. Okay, so we're going to save that, but nothing is showing up here yet. We are about to, that kind of moves us on to the next section. So now we have that attribute. Everything looks good. No red squigglies, going great. How do we put it in here? This is where we're going to start talking about some of the magic of React. So up until this point, this all looks like very normal HTML. Obviously we have this one weird component here, but that still looks like an HTML element. Everything seems above board. So what we're going to do here is where we have this hello world. We're going to delete that. We're going to add some curly braces. And now anything inside of these curly braces is now executing TypeScript, which is basically just JavaScript. So, for example, we're going to want to put the name here. And, it might be better for us to actually change it. We're actually not going to, just because going to try to move through this quickly. But we could rename that to maybe something a little bit better, like text to show or something. But now we have that name there. And let's go over here. And now our text is showing here, as you can see. Yeah, we're just passing it in from here, and we could even go and update this right now. Maybe let's add some more explanation points on there, and it just shows up instantly. And we're passing that value in through the props. This is called inline JavaScript, and it basically, we can do a bunch of things with this. Some other things we could do is we could do, if we can do, like, as I said, full JavaScript here. So let's say we wanted to only show that greeting if it was less than maybe, let's say, 5 characters. Then in that case, we would do, this is just conditionals. You've probably seen this in your programming classes, or ternary statements are also called. But otherwise, we just want to say, hello, the greeting was too long. Great. And we're going to save it. And hello, the greeting was too long now shows there because it's too long. But if we were to go and maybe just update this back to, howdy, and then reload it. Oh, no, that's still more than 5 characters. Okay, we're going to change this to say it's 8 characters. There we go. Now it just says howdy. So we can do conditional statements. That really helps us with kind of the logic flow stuff. And you could write like full JavaScript functions in here to do things. The limits are basically whatever you can do with JavaScript. So it essentially allows us to put our JavaScript inside of our HTML, which allows us to do these kind of cool operations and stuff. And we could have any variable here, all sorts of cool stuff. Is everyone following along with that part of it? Does that make sense? Yeah. Mm-hmm. I will here. Let me take a quick glance at that, but if it's like a bigger issue, we might just talk about it at the end of the workshop. Can you move? Okay, so just change that return statements to being parentheses instead of curly braces. Alrighty. Here, let's hopefully that's kind of small in there. It's massive on this screen. Here we go. Okay, so moving on to the next thing. The last thing to know about this inline JavaScript stuff is that you can actually use it to render lists. This is going to be important for the things like that component I was talking about. So here, let's just make an example. We're going to have maybe a const greetings. And, this could just be, we have a howdy and a, let's get rowdy and a hello. And I'm going to quickly go ahead and just change this back to being name because that's all we need. And then we have this list of greetings. But now if we wanted to render each of those and maybe the contents of this array changes, how would we do that? So this is, once again, we're going to add some inline JavaScript here. And we're going to do this funky thing. It looks a little weird, but trust me, it's going to be all good. We just do this little weird looking thing. This basically just means like that this code is going to execute as soon as it gets here. It basically creates a function and says it's going to run right now. But you know what? Actually, let's maybe make this a little bit easier. Let's just actually for now change this here. So const, we're going to make, actually, this is going to be, we'll do greetings to show. And this is going to be an empty array. And we're going to make another import here. It's going to be import type. This is a little bit different, but it's called import type React element from React. And we're going to type this array and throw basically, wait, shows to click. Oh, yeah, that's fine. Okay. All right. And then we're going to essentially loop through our greetings. So we do for, and this is just a for loop if you've seen it before, for const greetings of, or for const, let's do G of greeting. Okay. And then we do greetings to show dot push and then an array. So React components are just objects. So you can actually just push them to an array. And it's, this is what the issue is. This has to be an array. Basically, this just says it's an array of this type, very similar to Java if you've seen it before. So now we just greetings to show and we're pushing a new element to that array. And then, we're going to delete this greeting. And we're just going to put greetings to show here. Save that. And now, as you can see, all of our greetings are showing. So we have howdy, welcome. Oh, wait, we have that twice. I'm not sure exactly why that's happening right now, but you kind of get the gist. Yeah, that's odd, but we'll figure that out later. Okay. So that is kind of quickly what components are. The last thing to know about them is essentially that you can import components from other people. So components like this allow you to essentially have like very predictable code, very replicatable, and we're going to take advantage of that. And many people do by basically publishing components that other people can use. So if you go to our portfolio website, we have this cool like GitHub contributions graph. I didn't code this. I don't have the time to do that. I used someone else's library for doing that. And you can kind of see what that looks like on our index page over here. I think this is it. Yeah. Or no, it's in the hero. Go to definition. Okay. You see we have GitHub calendar here and username, that's my GitHub username and a style. And that's literally just imported from a library that I installed called React GitHub calendar. And it's kind of nice because it makes it so you don't have to rewrite the wheel in a lot of cases. It's a nice tool to use when you're designing out your portfolio. And you're going to see it in some other areas. But, enough with that. We're going to kind of move on to a different section that's not, and that is hooks. So this is kind of the second big part of React, and hooks are what make React reactive. So what are hooks? That sounds like an odd word. You probably haven't heard it before if you haven't done React before. We're gonna go ahead and actually make another new page, and let's just not a folder. And we're gonna name it hook demo. Make it all lowercase. And just like last time, we import type next page. And then we're going to do from next hook demo, just this return. And we're going to just basically have like a div, not a, whoops, that's all falling apart. There we go. And, we'll just name this hook demo. And, now we are going to go back to our browser here. And I'm just going to change the page over to hook demo. And we forgot to do our export. So we do export default hook demo. Now we have just the hook demo text there. And just to make things a little bit easier, I'm going to just make this text big. Cool. Okay. So what are hooks? Hooks essentially, basically we kind of showed how to structure our content, but now we need to know how to add actions to it. How do we make things happen? How do we change things? How do we make it reactive? So if you've used vanilla HTML and JavaScript before, you're probably used to doing something like document.getElement by ID, and you get it by the ID, and then you manually update the inner HTML. Basically, React says that's a bad way of doing things. That's imperative. And React is about writing declarative code where essentially your UI is always up to date with your data. It does this by every time that any of your data changes. When you're using hooks, it completely deletes your UI and completely re-renders it, but it does this all efficiently. Under the hood stuff, you don't have to worry about it, but it makes it so that anytime, maybe you pull some data down from the server, it automatically shows up in your UI. So this process that I'm talking about here, where we basically blow away the UI and add new data to it, is called the component lifecycle. The component lifecycle can be boiled down into 3 parts. The first part is called component did mount. That's basically when the component first gets rendered onto the page. The second it hits, so like that greeting, once it gets to that part of the React file, it's like, okay, that component is doing what we call mounting. Then when data changes in the component, that is called component did update. And then the last part of it is called component will unmount. Part of the process of making this efficient, as I said, is using hooks. Essentially, it allows you to hook into the functionality of React. There's a lot of complicated stuff happening under the hood, and hooks kind of allow you to hook into this process and just take advantage of that stuff without having to, worry about all those weird internals of, as I said, blowing away the UI and then re-rendering it efficiently. There's a whole slew of hooks built into React, but we're going to be focusing on 2 for today for the sake of brevity. The first one is called use effect, and the second one is called use state. So let's go over them. The first one, use state, is at the core of what makes React reactive. Essentially is what it does is it gives you use state, and it gives you a variable and a setter function. So you can set the value of that variable using the setter function. I know this all sounds confusing at the moment. I'm going to demo what I mean in code in a second, at which point it should make a lot more sense. In React, state is what is called immutable. Some other words for immutable are it's not mutable, it's unmodifiable, or it's read only. This means that you cannot directly modify the state. So if we have a variable that we have in here, we can't just directly update the value of the variable. This is part of that whole process of making everything efficient. Once again, I know that sounds a little bit complicated, but I'm going to explain what I mean in just a second. I'm going to show you guys this in a common example for showing how useState works, which is a counter. So let's just get started. So we're not going to be using any components for this part. We just have this main hook demo page. And, we're going to have to import some things from React, primarily the useState hook. So we import useState from React. We're going to save that. All righty. So first thing we have to do is, up here in our component or in our function, because as I said, components are just functions. We have a const, and you can already see here how Copilot is recommending some stuff. We have a count and a set count, and then useState. This looks a little bit weird, right? We have this variable declaration that's an array. It's a little bit wacky, but it's super simple. Essentially, count is its own variable, so we can access count just directly. And then also set count is its own variable. This basically just means the function returns two values. I'm gonna save that again. And now let's do a little bit of, kind of code on how we're gonna make this counter. So we're gonna add a, let's make this an H2 element, and we're gonna have count, and then we're gonna show the count here. And as you can see here, this useState hook, we have 0 as the value that we pass in. This is essentially the value, like the default value of the hook. Below the H2 element, we're going to have a button, right? And we're just going to name it, we're going to add some text to it, and we're just going to name it add1. And we also are going to need something to happen when we use that button. So what we're going to do is we're going to be doing onClick, this is just HTML. And then we have a value that we've put here. This is a function that's going to execute when we do that onClick. So we're going to make a function here. This is like a little bit of a weird syntax thing. This just means it's a function. And then we're going to do set count. And we are going to set it to count plus 1, right? So this should be pretty straightforward. And if we come over here, this isn't a button. It's some like tailwind stuff. I'm going to go into some of the styling stuff later on, but we're basically just going to quickly do that. Don't worry about it. Basically, I'm just giving that button a color of red and making it a little bit bigger. And when we do add1, you can see our UI just updates. So we can do add1, and we could even add another button here. Whoops. Here we go. Another button. And this is going to be -1. And we can just do -1, save that. And let's add a break element here. Let's add 2 break elements so that you can see that those are 2 separate buttons. There we go. And now we can actually just do -1 and then add 1, -1. And you can kind of see that anytime that we update the count, it just automatically changes the value in our UI. This is super nice, and it's going to be even more useful once we get around to the actual backend part of this, where we're importing much more complex data than just a -1 or +1. But does that part make sense to everyone? Are there any questions I can answer about that? Alrighty, great. Yeah, that part should be pretty self-explanatory. But I will say one note with that part I was talking about immutable. As you can see, this function can't literally be count is equal to count -1. That will not work. You cannot directly modify the count. So keep that in mind, when you're doing things. So we couldn't have this be, maybe something like, this and count equals count +1. That wouldn't do anything. And you can see we even get a red squiggly because it says count is a constant, or it's immutable. So just bring that back. Okay. Now let's talk about the second hook, the useEffect one. So useEffect is another essential hook when you're using React. It allows you to hook into the component lifecycle that I talked about earlier. That component did mount, component did update, component will unmount. So useEffect takes 2 parameters. And I'm gonna here. Let's do. Let's add. Yeah, we'll just keep it on this part. We'll just add another thing here. We'll just add some more break elements, and we'll do use effect. All right. So we need to do another import. We're going to do use effect here. And basically, we now want to hook into the component lifecycle. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about the component lifecycle part. So component did mount. How do we hook into that with a use effect? So we're going to have a const, or actually, we're not going to have a const here. We're going to just have use effect. And then like last time, it's just a hook. It's use and then something. So use effect does take some different values, though. So the first thing it takes is a function. This function is basically what's going to run at that given stage in the component lifecycle. But how do we choose which one of those parts do we want it to run on? We do that using a dependency array. Essentially, that's just this array here. And I'm going to go a little bit more into detail of what goes into it. But I'm going to talk about it in order of the component lifecycle. So the first thing that happens is the component mounts. It's when it gets added onto the page. That happens for every use effect hook. So if you only want it to run when it mounts, just have an empty array here. And essentially that means that something will happen here when we load or render the page. What am I going to do? Maybe let's try setting the count to 100 when the component. This is inefficient because really, if we wanted to actually do this, we would just set it to 100 here. But, just for demoing use effect purposes, I'm going to do it that way. As you can see, when we load the page, it's now no longer 0 because this is running as soon as the component mounts. And now we, can modify the value. But even when we're changing the state or doing those component did update, it's not setting the value back to 100. It basically only does it when the component first renders. But let's say we wanted to add maybe something else that we want to do. Essentially, let's say we want to hook into that component did update part of the component lifecycle. In order to do that, let's change what we're doing here. Let's say instead of that, count has changed, as we're going to alert that text. Right. So right now we load the page, and basically it just means as soon as the page loads and the component gets mounted, it says count has changed. Right. And we're going to add one, but it isn't running right now when that count does change. It's only when the page first loads. And why it's executing twice is beyond me, but we'll figure that out later. I guarantee that's some weird thing with the way the project was scaffolded. But you guys shouldn't be running into that issue. Okay. So let's go ahead and change what variables essentially have us do that count update. So we have count here, and we've added that as a variable in the dependency array. That basically means that this use effect will now not only run when the component mounts, but also when count changes. So this is a dependency. So we're going to save that again, and it's going to give us an alert because we reload the page. So now we're going to reload the page, and it's going to show the alert. And now we're going to add one, and it's showing now every time that we update the count. That essentially allows you to hook into that component to update. And if we had other use state variables here, we could have other things. Let's say we had like a timer value or some other thing, right? We could add those all as dependencies, and that use effect would run for those. And you can have as many use effect or use state hooks as you want in the component. Add as many to your heart's content. And then finally, we have the component did unmount. Now, just for the sake of brevity, this one's going to be a little bit more difficult to actually demo directly for you, but I will write the code on how it works. Essentially, from your use effect function, you're going to want to return a function once again. So we have a function inside of a function inside of a function. It's a little bit wonky, but if maybe we had a button that removes all those components from the page, maybe we have another state variable that says whether we should even be rendering the component in the first place. And when it changes to no, that component is no longer rendered on the page. When the component is getting deleted, you can say this component is unmounting. And I can't demo that really because I would have to have more use state and just time and everything. it's gonna act all weird. But that's essentially the gist of it. And I don't know why it changed it to looking like that, but whatever. I'm sure it had a reason. Um, but does use effect kind of make sense? I know it can be a little bit complicated and it sounds a little bit daunting at first, but you're not going to use effect all that much for this project. You are going to use state, but it's important to know components. They're kind of like the heart of React, and it's definitely an essential part of it to know. So does that make sense? Yes, awesome. Alrighty. There are a few other important hooks built into React, but for the sake of time, I'm not going to really go over them. Those, delete that so it stops alerting me every time I reload the page. Okay. Those two that come to mind that are super important are use ref and use memo. Use ref is basically kind of, think of it like use state, but it doesn't update the UI. So sometimes you may have some value that you don't want to render in the UI, and you don't want to cause React to re-render everything when that value changes. You just want to keep track of something. That's where ref comes in. And then use memo essentially is for making your React website a little bit more efficient. You're not going to use either of those for this project, so don't worry about it. But it is something to know in the future. The use memo side is for making your React app a little bit more efficient and making sure that it's not re-rendering things that it doesn't have to. It's memoization for those who have been in a class that talks about that. Okay, so now that we have React fundamentals out of the way, let's talk about some fun stuff. Styling. So this is kind of going to be the big part of, working on this hopefully over spring break. As you can see, I already have some style stuff here, but we basically are going to obviously want the website to look better than that. And the way we do that is through styling. Specifically, we're using a library called Tailwind CSS to do that. Tailwind is what is called a utility class library. It essentially allows us to kind of gives us classes so that we don't have to write our own direct CSS. And it just makes things a little bit easier. You can go to the Tailwind docs, not that. Tailwind UI is a different thing. Let's go to Tailwind documentation. Okay. Oh, they've added some new documentation, or maybe, I don't know what is going on. Docs, there we go. Okay, and you can be in here, and there's really easy. You can just search here. So we have, let's say we wanted to change the background color of our web page. So what's a good color? Let's change it to maybe this color of green. So we can just copy the class here. And we go over here, and we add a class name. This is very similar to CSS if you've done that before. But you would just save this, and now we have that class there. And when we go over to, it's right here. Now it's green. And we can go crazy with this. So if we want it to be the height of the screen, maybe because we want the minimum height, we want the height to always be the screen, we can just do HS screen. A lot of these are very simple, and it's something that I can't cover all of it. You just use the docs to look up what you want to do. Another good tool for it, if you can't find which class it would be for, use ChatGPT. It will take very simple layman's terms of what kind of styling you want to do. Just tell it you want to do it in Tailwind CSS, what classes should you use, and it's great for kind of breaking down exactly what you're trying to get done. And this, you can go crazy with this. So as I said, you can do font dash sans, and we can do, make it so that it's very bold, like we have there. And, we could do all sorts of crazy stuff. We can add more divs to make it so that there's another section on the page. Get creative with it. It's kind of just up to your imagination. You can do anything. Styling wise, I would recommend, kind of looking around the internet for basically inspiration. Look at other portfolio websites. The code for the completed project is on GitHub on ACM's GitHub page. You can just search ACM UTSA GitHub on Google, and it will come up, and you can view the code for this website if you kind of want to see how certain things are maybe being done. Whether it's how are we making this text big and this small and blue, and how are we adding these things in the back, and why is this in the center, and all that kind of stuff. It's very straightforward. A lot of it is like this being centered is justify content or it's justify center, align center. So one of those is for doing it vertically. One of them is for doing it horizontally. Very, very straightforward on that front. And I'm sure you guys will get the hang of CSS, and especially if you know CSS, you'll get the hang of Tailwind pretty quickly. Okay. Oh, and the last thing is design something unique to you. It's your portfolio website. So, if you have a certain hobby or there's like a certain like kind of design language you like, just look it up. No design is too complex. Make use of inspect element. Like unironically, you can just do inspect. And then, let's say we wanted to see what classes am I using to do this. Oh, I'm using the font sans, text 8XL, font black, and text white. And you can actually even see the raw CSS over here on the side. Okay. And there are sometimes where you are going to want to write just like straight up CSS. You do that in the globals.css files. So I'm not showing you guys how to do CSS in this workshop. There's a lot of good resources for that online. So we have like maybe some class, I don't know, and then we have like not apply color and then maybe red or something. There's a million different ways to do it, but that's just kind of the way you can write custom classes. There's some cases where you want to do that with like really complex animations or gradients. It can just be a lot to do in Tailwind because you need like 100 different classes, but most of the time you can just use Tailwind and you'll be perfectly fine. And once again, there's a lot of good resources for learning Tailwind online. Just look on YouTube. It's pretty straightforward, so I'm not going to dive too deep into it. Let's talk a little bit about routing. So as you can see here in this demo project that we did, we have the hook demo, and then we also have like our example, right? And then we also obviously have our index, but you'll notice that we type index here, and that's not it. Index means that nothing, basically. That's the way you can think of it. And we have this component here, and I'm actually going to go ahead and just like nuke all this because that's the template and we don't need it. If it lets me. Here we go. And I'm going to just change this to a div and say, this is the index. We can update that, and you can see it shows this is the index there. Pretty straightforward on the routing side of things. The one thing to note is that you need to do links in a very specific way. So you can see we have this import link at the top of the page. You want to do link, and you'll add an href. If you've done HTML, this would generally, you're probably used to this being an A. Way more straightforward here. Just do a link. And essentially, you're going to want to do slash, let's say we wanted to do hook demo. And then we would just give this some text. And then maybe to make this look like a link, we want to do underline and text blue 500. Let's try that. So now this looks like a link, and we click it, and it brings us to our hook demo page. I'm going to go into more reason next week, or not next week, but in the next workshop of why we use link. But essentially, it's because of Next.js. It makes everything much, much faster for doing this kind of page routing stuff. You could use an href. Don't do it, though. It's going to make your page much, much slower. And I'll go more into detail about that when we have a little bit more time next week, since I know we're like over the 4 o'clock time right now. Yeah, we'll also do form. I'm also going to probably hold off on doing forms until the next workshop as well, just because backend isn't too complex in this project. It's going to show you how to basically do REST APIs, but we'll have more time to go over forms next week as well. The last thing I want to show you is how to add images to your website, though. So we have this public folder, and we're going to go in here, and we're going to add a image. Let's find a good image, or no, I'm not going to go look for an image right now. Essentially, you would just drop the image in here, and now it is served from /image/ whatever that file name is. There's another component that you're going to want to use here, as long as it's an image from this folder, which is called next image. It's once again one of those like custom HTML elements. And once again, we're not going to have any text inside of our image, obviously, but we can go here and we can do source, and then we do like some source. We're going to get a red squiggly because that's not a real image. One other thing to note is you always, it won't compile until you add a alt. So that could be blank if you really don't have a description for the image, but for the most part, this is basically to help out accessibility. You generally always want to do this. Add an alt tag to it. Maybe this is a photo of a dog, in which case we would say photo of a dog. And that way people who use screen readers and whatnot are able to essentially use your website without any issues. It's just the good thing to do pretty much. And it does put up a red squiggly if you don't do that. Okay, I think that's kind of the really quick React rundown. Admittedly, React is a very complex topic. There's a lot of like nuance to it, essentially. This was kind of supposed to be the very basic rundown and explaining these things in very wide concepts. Essentially, these should be like the small Lego pieces that you can use to build much, much bigger UIs. You're going to get to things being created. I can actually, let me pull up a kind of example here. I have the Rowdy Hacks website here. This is the, doubt it's even going to show on the page. This is the code for just the space section of the website. As you can see, there are an absolute ton of divs, and it goes down like 5 component levels deep. It gets a little bit crazy, but think of it like blocks and boxes. You're basically putting things inside of things to build like an overall arching UI, kind of like a tree. So if you've taken data structures, it's just like that. And then, for like some concluding stuff, especially because there's going to be a pretty wide gap between this and the next workshop. The next workshop will be the last one, and it's going to be focusing on backend and kind of tying everything together. The hope is that if you are planning on attending that workshop, you will be out of spring break with a fully functioning front end. For the blog post part, you're going to want to go ahead and make a blog.tsx file. Make a new page, essentially, like I showed you guys, and just design like a dummy one. So basically just one blog post. What would that look like? And just put like built-in values. So don't use like state or effects or anything. Just write the text directly inside the HTML and show that on the page. And next week, we're going to go about how do we essentially take the data from our back end and put it onto the front end. And I'm also going to go over forms at that point because forms can be a little bit tricky, but we have a good way to do that. And that's going to be better to explain next week anyway, or not next week, but next week, because it's just a little bit more, it integrates very closely with the back end, essentially. So it's a lot better to kind of explain both those concepts at the same time instead of having the huge gap in between. As I said, look for other like inspiration, other websites, design a portfolio that's unique to you. As I said, no design is too complex. I know a lot of it can look daunting, but there are really good resources for doing this kind of thing online. So definitely just look into them, use Inspect Element, draw inspiration for different sources. And then the other thing is feel free to use some online libraries. So we had that GitHub calendar thing. There's another one I use often called React Icons, which is somewhere. Which one of these folders is it? Oh, here we go. We have the index.tsx, and let's go to the about. As you can see here, we have these like weird kind of things. This is a library called React Icons. I would definitely recommend looking into it. Essentially, it just gives you really easy icons to use. The documentation is very clear. The way I recommend checking if a library is like good to use is the cyber people are going to hate this. So if any of them are in the room, I'm sorry. But essentially, let's say we wanted to add React icons. The way you search for libraries is they're hosted on a website called NPM. We're going to go to React Icons, and you basically just vibe check it. Does the docs look good? Are there a lot of downloads? Seems safe to me. Let's roll. So one thing to note is it does say NPMI here. You're going to want to use yarn add because we are using yarn. Just keep that in mind. It might be an easy thing to forget, but a lot of websites, you can see here, and this is forced to be added by NPM, this part here. You can literally see the first thing they recommend is that you use yarn instead of NPM. Yarn is faster. That's basically it. And then you can see the imports and everything is super straightforward, and you can view the documentation. And let's say we wanted a logo of ice cream. you can see they have literally more ice cream icons than you could ask for. And all these are free to use. Then they're built right into your website. Would recommend that. And as I said, there's like a ton of libraries. So look around, a lot of good options. And yeah, I think that is about it. If anyone does have any questions that are like more detailed, I can kind of come around and hopefully help out with those. If you do run into any questions over the break, feel free to post them in ACM server. You know, I do have some stuff going on over the break, but I will try to look at it when I can and answer any questions y'all run into. And then, as I said, final workshop, it's going to be backend, tying everything together and how to host it on the internet so that other people can look at it instead of having it just on localhost. But yeah, thank you guys so much and have a good spring break.